4020.
We're going to have to touch on some things that are less savoury, like what's happening at Salford.
Well, let's get Salford.
What's happening with the women's game?
Let's get Salford out of the way. Well, the women's game that's just, I think we can talk about that as well. But Salford.
Yes.
So you were there.
I was
watching on the telly. I thought Wilkin and Carney were brilliant in their questionnaire of Chris Irwin. Chris Irwin, isn't that his name? And I feel sorry for him because obviously he's been put in this position to run an absolute basket case of a rugby league club.
I just think it needed more. It needed longer with it. Because again, it's headline. It's like machine gun questioning, instant response, move on to the next one. And the questions were brilliant because they were exactly what needed to be asked. But you couldn't develop an answer and then go back to that question and question it. Yeah, you'd moved on to the next one. Having now been to Salford again, but been to Salford the first time when the deal's all done, everything's great.
Yeah.
You know,
parading the players. And all that.
Here's our previous owner delivering the match ball, all that kind of stuff. To then go sort of 5 weeks later when there's a pall over the club because it's not moved on, and in fact,
they might not pay the wages.
It was never at that point. You do see it slightly differently, but a couple of things struck on the way home when you're trying to make sense of what's happening. One is you cannot fault the Salford fans. The ones that are still going, they're still paying their whatever it is to go to a game there, or they bought season tickets in good faith, like Hull fans did last year in good faith. You can't fault with the greatest respect to the team that they put out. They were never going to win that game. It was a question by how many they were going to lose it. And they did really well in the first half because they stayed in the game, even though physically they weren't as big as their opposition, and that was going to tell. But they stayed and they supported, and you had nothing but admiration for that. So I tried to think about why are we at the impasse that we're at, and whose fault is it? Having seen the Irwin interview, having spoken, then I got the chance to speak to Tony Sutton, who'd already done the Sky interview that came in and then did a press interview, which was basically a straight bat. He couldn't really say very much, didn't really say very much. And you start to ask yourself, where does the fault in all of this lie? So you look at the owners and you say, their imperative is to buy a stadium and the land surrounding it that has a huge commercial value. What they're not contracted to do at this moment is support an ailing team that's been very badly run for however long it's been badly run for economically. It's been successful, but clearly it's been badly run. Badly run on two fronts, in that that success has meant they've overspent and never cleared the debt. So the debt becomes more of a noose around the club's neck. They haven't really invested in reserves and academy. They're now starting to move in that direction, and they're doing some really good work with, Africa. They're trying to help out in Ghana, and they're doing something with the Copperheads in Florida. The aim is to do things right, but they're only just setting up reserves and academy. But that's come back to haunt them now because they really needed reserves and academy. The players that they're bringing in are trying their very best, but they're not at that level. But I was thinking about it's like if you want to buy a house, and the house you want to buy, the roof's leaking, and you haven't yet had the survey on the house, so you can't buy it, and you're putting questions to the surveyor who's giving you some reasons where there might be some faults in the house. But could you pay for the roof to be mended before you've actually had your bid accepted for the house? And you'd go, well, why would I pay for the roof to be mended if I don't end up getting the house in the end anyway? Because until I can agree a price with you and we can take into account that I want to pay for this and I don't want to pay for it. Now, that's where I think the owners have been a bit... Their approach has not been great in terms of what they've said to the players and what they've promised and not delivered on. But I really don't think they want to put money into a rugby club until they know they can get their asset. And there is the Salford Football Club that they could bring into that asset that would probably give as much, if not more return than the rugby league club that's currently there. So it's a harsh reality that they're really not interested in the rugby league club. They would be if it was holding its own and paying for itself, but they're not going to bail something out until they know that they have got an asset that they can exploit. Now, whether that's right or wrong, that's the commercial world that we live in. Why it's taking so long to negotiate with the council, that's a question that I don't think's been asked, that needs to be. So I don't know how this rolls forward. We do know that the RFL, if necessary, will prop up the club for the remainder of the year by paying whatever necessary wages they need to if the owners either move away or keep defaulting, because they have to have a Salford team in Super League this year. The cost of them not having it is greater than propping it up. So Salford will exist in Super League for the remainder of this season. It's an impasse that can only be broken, presumably, by negotiation between the council and new owners. They're not the people that are being questioned. You know, Chris Irwin is an employee. And whatever he's told to say, he will say. I don't feel sorry for him. I feel sorry for the fact that he's been given duff information. And he's had to be the public face of it. But nobody's interviewing the council, as far as I can see, and saying, what's holding this up? And if it's that they don't want to give you enough money, then you know, at the moment, it's on a tangent. The NRL are trying to get into Western Australia. And the issue is not that there is going to be a team in Perth in the NRL. The issue is how much are the Western Australia government going to put into this project whereby they will get an NRL team in their city, and are they going to pay for academies? Are they going to pay for junior grassroots development? Are they going to pay towards... I think they don't operate in the way we do, that I've got to pay for teams to come to them. Yeah. But what are they going to do to alleviate the fact that the game itself doesn't have to pay for Perth to be there, that it becomes profit making in its own right? And the argument at the moment is not that there's going to be a Perth, it's what they're going to pay. And the NRL want this much and Perth want to give this much, and the answer's somewhere in the middle, and within the next couple of weeks it'll probably be announced that they found the right compromise and it's going ahead. That's the questions that haven't been asked of the Salford situation. If the councillor here and the owners are here, where do we get to the bit in the middle, and how long is that going to take? That's a long answer to what was a less than illuminating 80 minutes of rugby league.
Well, we'll get onto that shortly. Well, not shortly. We'll leave it very short to talk about.
James McDonald scored 5 tries. He should have had 5.
Phil says you're asking Perth for 300 million. Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, that could buy Salford 300 million times over. Ian's mentioned the bit about they're not interested about the club, interested in the stadium. That says it all.
But then I can understand why they wouldn't be interested in a club that is a loss-making business at the moment. You're not going to spend a lot of time and energy trying to bail that out and save it until you know that the reason that you want it in the first place is secure. I can sort of understand that from their point of view.
They're business people.
I don't understand why it's taking so long, or what the blockage is, or how you then who gets the plunger to solve the blockage. But I just think by saying that's black there and it's white there, the only people who are emerging with any degree of credit, apart from the Salford players, are the fans.
When he went on TV and said the costs were unsustainable, whatever the quote was, I put it on Twitter. I can't remember what exactly the quote was. And I thought, so how did we end up in this position? So I don't know what the fit and proper persons test ensues or includes.
Mr. Johnson relates a bit of that in there about what the clubs wanted the governing body to be able to do, not with Salford, but in general, and what the club needs to do itself. And he goes into a bit of detail about Salford, which I don't need to mention in here. If you need it, it's there. But the truth is, the fit and proper person test is to do with evidence of funding, and they have provided that. What they haven't done is release that funding. But that's not a governance issue.
Would anyone who has been involved in Salford's demise pass a future fit and proper person test to be a director of a rugby league
The
club
real-
when they've driven Salford.
The
to this
real
position.
problem they've got is that if this all falls through, it will revert back to those directors.
Because we're in that position again where you look at the Bradford thing and you go, well, why didn't we have an inquiry into that? Because we know why, but why aren't we doing the same here? Because again, we need to know what's happened so we can try and prevent it in the future. I mean, the simple answer is they spent money they didn't have.
Yeah.
And that's an easy thing to avoid. Now, if you're Castleford, who we assume aren't spending the cap, or haven't in the past, we know Wakefield, when they were relegated, didn't spend the cap
We
and were
we
relegated because
we
of
know
that.
that Hull weren't last year.
You know, I know,
We certainly know London weren't when they were in Super League.
having worked at Wakefield briefly pre-COVID and seeing how on a shoestring things were run, but professionally, not run like an amateur team or whatever. They were run professionally, but on a strict budget.
With costs cut.
You can do that and be a professional club.
But what you can't be is successful.
But Salford haven't been successful.
But
they've got to a
they've
couple
got
of
to a
but they've
grand
won
final,
nothing.
and they got to and they got to the playoffs last year, and they had 11,000. I think again the RFL looked at the potential that Salford have is the 11,000 people that were at the playoff game with Lee last year, and said there is a viable club here. If all of the stars align, there are enough people that will support it. There are, it is in a strategically important area for the sport. It's worth us trying to do whatever we can to save it. But I think the issues are, and the blame should lie not just with the owners who may or may not be dragging their feet. We don't know the details of the deal that they're trying to put together. It may be with the council. The council's obligation is to protect the ratepayers of the borough, and there
probably should be a lot of questions asked about previous deals.
Well, and the problem with that is that very few people in that borough support rugby league. As witnessed by the Salford crowd. So they've got to be careful that they don't, give away an asset for next to nothing. That's a very small proportion of their population. But the blame also has to lie with the Salford club and the way it's been run. So it's complicated, and I came away from Salford thinking there isn't an easy. You grill the CEO. It's about time that somebody did go front and centre. We know Ryan Briley's been interviewed by Sky today, and he's given it more from the player's perspective, from the mental health aspect. Vitally important. Absolved of blame. That the team that played on Thursday night could not have done any more other than Jade Nikarima, who I think was playing for Leeds. A very, very strange performance. He knew he had a young winger outside him and kept tossing balls into touch. Hello. Possession was going to be at a premium for Salford. They needed to hold the ball for as long as they could, and the number of times he gave it away early in the tackle count in their own half, bizarre. But the players completely absolved, the fans absolutely, and you never want to see a club going through that. But the club, the council and the owners, the answer lies within those three. It isn't simple.
Paul's mentioned the road network. Maybe that's what the council are dealing with. Maybe
it could be. I know one of the issues with the Odsal redevelopment was that it was stipulated that there had to be a new road off the M606 into the stadium. But that wasn't covered by the stadium development, and it was, the council are going to have to pay. And the council go, well, we don't have £1.5 million to pay for road.
Social care.
Yeah, we're not going to do it. And it's issues like that can scupper a deal.
I don't want to say Wakefield were lucky, because obviously it took some hard work from the people who were negotiating the deal. But when Newmarket was on the table, and I don't know what you'd call it, the deal was in place where if that was built, they had to build a stadium, and then they didn't. But they had to put money to pay for whatever, and you see where that ends. And it's the same, Salford in the same position as if Matt Ellis was from Salford, maybe they would be in the position where they now. If he was from Castleford, maybe Castleford would be. Absolutely. So it's all dumb luck, a lot of it. But again, as you say, the questions we can't
almost take it back to the owners that had the club when they decided to sell the Willows. The deal that they got was always going to hamstring the club. Marwan Kukash comes in, promises the earth, spends a load of money,
Big check.
but there was nothing there. There was no foundation to it. Then he leaves, and there's debt, and you know how it becomes then a self-fulfilling prophecy.
And some people still think he's a saviour. The thing that is getting me about Salford at the minute, and it's again, I understand the players are trying or whatever, and this and that and the other.
I don't think they can do any more.
No, but we've got to get past this. Oh, aren't they brave thing? Because they are professionals. They are being.
Yeah.
I said they're being paid to play. You know what I mean by that. I'm talking literally, but it almost takes it away from every team that's beating them at the moment, apart from Huddersfield. That they're just an easy beat team.
I also think that Ryan Briley says in his interview today that Callum Watkins had got to the point for his mental health where he had to move, and nobody holds that against him. And that's an issue that we haven't spoken enough about. That's why you need a really strong players' union. And if there are mental health issues, and if academy players are being thrown into a first team environment long before they should be, and you know, at the potential of suffering, you know, damage for doing that, there's a duty of care issue. Then maybe they shouldn't be playing at the moment.
And I say it again, I can't understand how the players' union or whatever it was last year was so upset about players being banned for breaking the rules, but they're saying sod all on this.
Do we have a players' union?
It's easy to spend money if you're prepared to take on that. It's just the charlatans won't pay it back, says Paul. Phil wants us to move on from Salford. We'll move on.
Sorry.
Apart from mentioning the game.
It's just having been
nothing else happened
there,
this week. That was the problem.
I felt that, you know, I had a bit more of a feel for what was going on. I apologise to Phil.
The game was rubbish, wasn't it? I mean,
Apart from James McDonald.
The great thing is, and I used to complain that the Super League show on a Monday night was pointless because they show you highlights of Thursday's game well out of date. So we don't need to go through Leeds and Salford because
it wasn't rubbish. You always knew who was going to win that game. Yeah. It was a question of by how much.
It was a game on TV.
For Leeds, the big thing was that they nilled an opponent, and you should never decry that in Super League.
Leeds need to find consistency. Salford need to find whatever, and we haven't necessarily learned anything that we didn't know before that game.
No.
But did Jake Connor do something good? I can't remember.
Yeah, he set up a couple of tries. I think Leeds are a top 6 team this year, which is an improvement on their last 2 years. I hope Paul Rowley doesn't get disenchanted with the situation at Salford, and he's another one who seems to be emerging with honour from a dishonourable situation.
Leeds Rugby League journalist says Leeds to finish in top 6.
Absolutely.
That's what it'll say on the internet.
Yeah.